People that work in bikini waxing salons, what is the worst/disturbing experience you have come across while giving someone a bikini wax? I used to work as an esthetician, and I'll never forget the first Brazilian I ever did. I was still new to the process, so to reach the bottom area, I had the client go on all fours. After I powdered up her bottom, I was carefully examining the direction of her hair growth to make sure I applied the wax correctly, as I had been trained to do. Then, out of nowhere, I noticed her body twitching, and I saw some unusual movement. Before I could fully process what was happening, she fully farted in my face. She was super embarrassed and quickly explained it away as an air bubble. It didn't smell like one though. Story 2. I have one that stands out. A month before her wedding, a client came into my salon for a wax. She had never groomed her pubic hair and mentioned she was a virgin. She wanted to get waxed just before her big day, which seemed a bit unusual, but understandable. I recommended she try a wax beforehand to see how her skin would react, as it can be unpredictable, especially with someone who hasn't had that kind of treatment before. However, she declined and scheduled an appointment 3 days before her wedding. When she came back, I was not prepared for the amount of hair she had. For a fair-skinned blonde, it was surprising to see such long, coarse, dark hair. But as a professional, I continued, I trimmed and cleaned up the area, getting ready to wax. Even after trimming, her skin was barely visible under the dark hair. As I started the waxing process, I noticed some skin tags and moles that weren't visible earlier. It wasn't a big deal until I pulled a strip near the labia area and unexpectedly removed about 20 skin tags. She screamed, and it was loud enough for the entire salon to hear. And then, to make matters worse, she started bleeding heavily. While I knew how to handle minor bleeding from waxing, this was unlike anything I'd experienced. The bleeding wouldn't stop, and I ended up calling an ambulance. I thought I almost killed her. Maybe not the grossest story, but it was traumatic. I changed professions soon after. I imagine her wedding night wasn't magical either. Edit to answer questions. What I initially thought were skin tags could potentially have been HPV-related growths. However, according to her client intake form, she had no known illnesses or conditions. I've also encountered warts during waxing before, and while they sometimes tear or bleed, they don't typically come off in the way that these did. After the incident, the room and all equipment were thoroughly sanitized. Yes, I understand that ambulance services can be costly, especially in the States, but it was the necessary course of action. She was still bleeding heavily when the EMTs arrived, and as I understand it, it's the responsibility of the business to ensure the safety and well-being of clients. I wasn't fired or get in any trouble, though I did feel guilty and chose to voluntarily report the incident to my state board. It was handled without any issues, and there were no repercussions. I never heard from her again, though we did make an effort to contact her afterward to check in. Unfortunately, we received no response. To clarify, she was slightly overweight, but not obese. Her hygiene appeared to be fine. For those unfamiliar, a skin tag is a small, fleshy growth of excess skin. These can develop for a variety of reasons, but they are often found in areas where there's frequent rubbing or sweating. While they are common in larger people, they can also occur in individuals of average size or even those who are thin. Skin tags generally aren't painful unless they are irritated, scratched, or otherwise aggravated. Story 3. As an esthetician, my most challenging experience was performing a full Brazilian wax on a woman who was extremely obese. At the time, I was still fairly new to the field and didn't yet have the experience to handle this type of situation with ease. I had difficulty getting the right angles, and I felt awkward asking her to adjust her position, especially since she had difficulty holding certain areas in place. Her legs were too large for me to reach certain spots, and she was unable to bend them properly. At one point, I accidentally lost wax between a skin fold and had to carefully separate the skin to apply the strip. The whole experience was physically taxing, as I had to position myself in awkward ways, and I remember my back hurting from the strain. On top of that, we were both sweating profusely since it was the height of summer. I'm sure with more experience, a seasoned esthetician would have been able to handle it better, but at the time, it was definitely one of my more challenging appointments. Story 4. I currently work at a waxing center and I have had many foul experiences. I love my job, but sometimes I wonder why I still do this. One incident stands out. A young client, no older than 17, came in for her first full Brazilian. I made sure to explain each step of the process in an effort to keep her comfortable. After finishing the front, I asked her to flip over so I could do the back area. I applied the wax, but unexpectedly, she let out a fart that caused a bubble to form with the wax. The sound was surprisingly loud and echoed through the room. I could tell she was embarrassed, and honestly, I felt for her. I immediately turned around and started fumbling with anything I could get my hands on to pretend I didn't just see what happened. She ended up leaving, and I never saw her again. It was an awkward moment for both of us, but it was one of those things that comes with the job. Story 5. I have a story from a client of mine about a previous coworker. So I have this client coming in for a Brazilian. As soon as we are in the room, she warns me that last time she was in, she didn't like her last experience and let me know that she has her pierced. I was like, cool, no problems. Thanks for the heads up, let's try to make this better. I figured she lifted or bruised. So we get started, and there's the piercing. No biggie. Well, halfway through, she starts talking, and I was like, I hope this has been a better experience for you. I wouldn't want a repeat of last time, and she explains that it wasn't the waxing, it was the waxer. Apparently, when she explained her piercing to the previous esthetician, she pulled the towel back and patted the pierced area without gloves, saying how she has never seen one of these before. Under no circumstance are you to directly touch a client there. The woman was not impressed and refused to return until she was sure the previous esthetician was no longer employed. So it's not really my experience, I just felt bad for my client. Story 6. I'm not a waxer, but I had an interesting experience during a session at a new place. Everything seemed to be going fine. I was chatting with the esthetician while lying on the table, trying to keep things light. She was facing away, preparing her supplies, when I noticed her sniffing. At first, I thought she might be crying, and I started to feel a little awkward. I said, I know it's been a while, but it can't be that shocking. And asked, hey, are you okay? And she turned around just full on ugly snot crying and explained to me that the appointment before mine was her recent ex-boyfriend's new girlfriend. Story 7. My instructor in cosmetology school told me about a time when they had to practice bottom waxing, and the way she was supposed to do it involved her putting talcum powder on the sensitive area. So, she powders the person up, and as she's grabbing something else from her work table, the person lets out an airy toot and a little fluff cloud of powder came with it. She couldn't contain herself and had to do the assignment another day. Story 9. I once had an experience where I became the gross customer, completely by accident. My ex-girlfriend was a big fan of the idea of shaving your chest and grooming. The less body hair, the better and blah blah. So, I thought I'd give it a try, but things didn't go as planned. During the waxing session, I ended up bleeding heavily from every pore on my chest. The esthetician had to stop mid-session because of it. After the bleeding slowed down, I helped clean up, paid for the session, and left. The bruises were visible for several weeks afterward, and I never attempted waxing again. Story 10. During my time as an esthetician, I performed a lot of waxing, sometimes up to 12 Brazilians a day, so I've encountered some less than pleasant situations. One of the most memorable what just happened moments occurred while waxing a well-groomed sorority girl. She seemed completely unaware of the unpleasant odor coming from the area. There was noticeable discharge. As I pulled a strip from her lower labia, near the V opening, what I can only describe as a sticky, gooey substance came off with it, splattering onto the wall behind me. She remained blissfully ignorant of the bacterial projectile, remaining completely unaware of the mess. Story 12. I have 2 experiences I'll never forget. 1. A seemingly normal 20-something-year-old woman came in for a waxing, but she clearly had no idea that her intimate areas needed cleaning. She was on her period, had an excessive amount of discharge, and it seemed like she hadn't wiped properly. Also, when I did the strips on her bottom, there was leftover residue on them. 2. There was an older man who came in for Brazilian laser treatments. He had a quirky, flamboyant personality, almost like an older, eccentric version of Jeffrey Rush. The first couple of times, he'd get aroused during the treatment, which is a common, albeit awkward, reaction for some guys. But the third time, as I was nearing the end of the treatment, he made a noise, and when I looked up, he had sprayed his on his stomach. I quickly finished the last few sessions, told him he was done, and left the room. I called my manager immediately to report what happened, and he was never seen again. And to top it off, he didn't even tip me. Also, the number of women who accidentally fart while being waxed is surprisingly high. They always feel embarrassed, but I reassure them that it happens all the time. After all, they're holding their knees to their chest and trying to keep still. It's bound to happen. Story 13. My salon mentor once told me about her experience in school when they taught Brazilians, which were all the rage at the time. However, it seemed like they never really demonstrated how to perform the service or discussed how to handle awkward situations. Her first client was a larger woman with a full bush who just hopped onto the table, spread her legs, and wore a dress, letting everything hang out. At the time, it was a bit traumatizing for her, but now it's funny to look back on. When I interned at a salon last year, the owner and I talked about the waxing services they offered. Brazilians were common, and she mentioned that many people assume they need to grow out their hair for waxing. The truth is, we have to trim it first because if the hair is too long, the wax pulls at the hair ends instead of the follicle. In her words, you think it's weird letting someone see your junk? Try making small talk while someone is using a tiny pair of scissors to trim your bush. So, please trim before coming in. Story 14. A coworker once told me that getting waxed at a beauty school was a great experience, super affordable, and they did a really good job. She must not have had many waxes herself. I went for my appointment and got this really sweet girl, and we were chatting while she worked. Then she said, "I'm just going to grab my classmate for some help." I thought, okay, no big deal. But after 20 minutes, I checked the clock and realized she hadn't made much progress. Usually, it only takes about 20 minutes max. Her classmate came in and I stopped talking, thinking maybe I had distracted her, just focusing on the clock. It had been almost an hour at this point, and my legs were starting to hurt from being spread out for so long. So, I lied and said, "Hey, not to rush you guys, but I have an appointment in 20 minutes that I need to get to." They said, "Hey, we'll get our teacher." Next thing I know, I had 3 women crowded around my V area. Needless to say, I never went back. Story 15. Not completely on topic but just as gross. My boss has been piercing and tattooing for over 20 years, so he has some wild stories. The one that stands out most was when a woman came in for a piercing. While prepping, he noticed something strange, a little green shoot poking out from her V area. He was like, what is that?" She calmly explained that she had used some garlic as an at-home remedy for something, and apparently, she left it in long enough for it to start sprouting. A lot of people come in right after having physical sesh too, which adds to the fun. I once helped a friend remove a cheek piercing that was too short, and the skin had grown over it on the inside. To fix it, she had to poke a hole and push the jewelry back through. As she did, a huge, disgusting pimple on the inside popped, and she had to squeeze out all the white stuff. Meanwhile, the woman was barely dressed, asking if it was okay to do some screaming in pain, and holding a Walmart bag full of douches. Story 16. Oh boy, are you guys in for a treat? I'm currently training as a beautician and working part-time in a beauty salon, so I've heard my fair share of horror stories. But the one my teacher shared with us definitely takes the cake. A woman came in wanting a Hollywood wax, everything gone, and she seemed a little nervous about it, mentioning she had very dark, coarse hair. My teacher assured her that she had plenty of experience with Hollywoods and that she'd seen it all, or so she thought. My teacher leaves the client to get ready, and when she returns, she immediately notices a foul smell. She doesn't say anything, thinking it's just nerves, and gets to work with the wax. But when she started pulling the first strip, she felt lightheaded. It wasn't just hair that came off. Attached to the wax was a thick, dark brown string of goo. She quickly disposed of the strip and tried to clean up the mess, asking the client what was going on down there. The woman confessed that she was too embarrassed to see a doctor and had hoped waxing would somehow take care of the issue. Needless to say, after hearing that story, none of us in class were eager to start doing specialized waxing anytime soon. Story 17. As a licensed waxer in New York for over a decade, I've seen more V area than most people could imagine. Thankfully, most of the clients I've worked with, especially those willing to pay the price at the spas I've worked at, take excellent care of themselves. But there is one client I'll never forget. She was impeccably dressed, an attractive 30-something professional with a great figure. Her hair was always perfectly styled, and her outfit was always on point. The cost of her handbag could have easily exceeded my monthly paycheck. The way she carried herself, you'd think she had servants to bathe her in rose water every morning. But unfortunately, no one had ever taught her how to properly clean herself down there. I was shocked by how much smegma could accumulate in just a month. Each time I saw her, I found myself thinking, it's only been a month. How could someone so put together let this build up? The strip I pulled from her backside always had an alarming amount of brown residue on it. Even though it's been over 5 years since I last worked with her, I can still vividly remember the experience. She's the reason I now keep baby wipes in the room and have made it a standard procedure to offer clients the option to freshen up before a treatment. Story 18. My sister is an esthetician, and the only time I ever had a Brazilian was when she was training. She begged me to be her first client, so I agreed. My sister did a great job, but while I was at the beauty school, I got to chatting with some of the teachers. They told me that they often get clients with issues like bad discharge or symptoms of STDs, like herpes. The teachers believe these individuals come to the school because it's more affordable and because, as students, they're less likely to be turned away for things like that. I was honestly surprised by my sister's level of knowledge about various skin conditions by the time she graduated. She's been a waxer ever since. She says she gets at least a couple of skank a week. Story 19. I'm not a professional waxer, but I get waxed regularly. I usually do it myself, but I don't wax my genital area for safety reasons. I tried once years ago, and ended up accidentally ripping my labia minora away from the labia majora, like a zipper being opened. It wasn't as painful as it sounds, and it healed completely without scarring, thankfully, but it was one of the most horrifying experiences of my life. There was so much blood, and I honestly thought I had permanently injured myself. Now, if I need that area waxed, I only go to licensed professionals. The issue is, I get terrible razor burn and eczema whenever I shave, and I have too much hair to just leave it alone, so waxing is really my only option. Strangely, waxing doesn't irritate my eczema, which is a relief. The downside is that I have noticeable scars on my upper thighs from when I was younger, and it's really embarrassing when a new waxer sees them. The professionals I've been to have all been kind and respectful, but I can still feel the awkwardness. I always make sure I'm clean before going, as I'm a bit of a hygiene freak. Even so, it's always uncomfortable. Reading some of the stories here makes me feel a bit better, but it's still an awkward experience. Story 21. I don't do waxing myself, but having worked at spas and salons for almost 10 years, I've heard plenty of waxing stories from my coworkers. One of the saddest situations involves young kids, around 6 or 7 years old, who come in because they're being bullied at school for having unibrows or hair on their upper lip. The first waxing experience can be pretty painful, especially since kids' skin is so sensitive, so I've seen a few kids leave in tears after their session. There are also some strange situations with adult clients. A couple of times, guys have come in with their girlfriend, wife, or partner, wanting to watch them get a Brazilian wax as some sort of foreplay. The esthetician is just there to do her job, not to be involved in your personal fantasies. We also had a guy come in asking for a men's Brazilian wax, which isn't a service we offer. Men's Brazilians are trickier than women's, requiring extra training that most estheticians don't seek out because it's not something taught in school, and the procedure can cause serious injury if done incorrectly, like pulling skin the wrong way, which could result in stitches. So, not many salons offer it, at least not in my area. So, this guy comes in wanting a Brazilian, and the receptionist informs him that we don't offer that service, as it's only available for women. He insisted, asking why we offer it for women but not men, calling it sexist. The receptionist explained that it's a different technique and we don't have anyone trained to do it. He kept pushing, asking about when we'd offer it and insisting on speaking to the esthetician directly to see if he needed it. Despite the receptionist's explanation that the esthetician wasn't trained and wouldn't be able to help him, he kept insisting. After repeatedly being told no, he stormed out, calling the receptionist a name. It wasn't that he wanted a Brazilian wax, it's that he was so insistent after being told no several times that made the situation uncomfortable. Story 22. Not the waxer, but the waxee. I had been constipated for days and had to resort to laxatives, but they didn't seem to work even after 24 hours. Of course, this was the day I had a waxing appointment scheduled. The odds of me getting severe stomach cramps the moment I lay down on that table must have been slim, right? It felt like something straight out of a comedy movie, but, of course, it happened. As soon as the therapist started working, I began sweating profusely, gripping the table, and clenching my cheeks with everything I had. The worst part? I was getting a Hollywood wax, not just a Brazilian. And let me tell you, this lady was thorough. Slowly, excruciatingly slowly, she made her way to the end. I thought I might pass out, but then, as I breathed a sigh of relief, she said those fateful words that still haunt me. Okay, now let's turn you over and do the back. The back? The back? Trying to keep my composure, I managed a polite British smile, flipped over gingerly, and found myself praying to every god that would listen, just hoping to get through it. A couple more strips later, thankfully, the only things being ripped were the wax strips, not anything else, and I was done, still intact, though 40-pound lighter. I hobbled home, gripping my house key so hard in my palm as I shakily opened the door and ran upstairs to finally release what I had been holding in. Moral of the story, never combine laxatives and waxing, folks. Trust me on that one. Story 23. I am the client, not waxer. I travel a lot and have gotten maintenance done all over the world. After so many sessions, my hair hardly grows anymore. I've had a variety of experiences, and let me tell you, a lot of estheticians have definitely ripped some hair out of my hoo-ha. Two of the most disturbing instances of bad waxer behavior. 1. I went to a friend who ran a private spa out of her home. She was normally very professional, but one evening she had childcare issues, and her daughter was screaming and pounding on the door during my Brazilian. She begged me to allow her daughter into the room. I honestly had no idea what to do, especially since my legs were splayed open. The daughter sat on the floor eating her dipstick, thankfully not looking at the table, but still, it was a weird situation. 2. While living in Paris, I booked a Brazilian at a mid-priced salon chain. The waxer was young, and I could tell she wasn't very experienced. Towards the end, I started paying more attention to her technique, sacre bleu. She was using the same applicator stick for every dip. Any professional knows that hygiene dictates using a new wooden stick for each application to prevent contamination of the wax. Nope, not her. This meant she was likely smearing stray hairs and skin particles from every other client onto me. It was absolutely disgusting. Worst wax ever. Story 24. I had a girl come in after about a year without waxing. She told me it had been a while and that she had her period, and she was wearing a tampon. I reassured her it was fine and asked her to lie down. As I turned around to start waxing, I noticed she had an incredible amount of hair, so much that I couldn't even see her skin. As I started cleansing, making small talk, I noticed the cotton round was turning red. Somehow, her period had gotten all the way up to the top of her bikini area, so I had to clean her several times. Then I started waxing, and as I removed the majority of the hair, I saw bits of dried blood on her skin. By this point, I was trying my best to breathe only when I was picking up the wax because the smell was so bad, but I still tried to make her feel comfortable. By the time I finished most of the waxing, I saw her tampon string, and it was pretty much black. Almost done, I was preparing to do the bottom strip. When I turned around to lay the strip, I was hit with another smell. She had so much poop stuck in her hair down there, it was all mixed in. It seemed like she hadn't wiped at all. The room smelled so bad when she left that I had to air it out, and the whole hallway ended up smelling too. I was so frustrated that someone thought it was okay to come in like that, especially since she didn't tip. I would have understood if I had given terrible service, but she left looking like a brand new woman, all ready for her vacation, thankful and happy. But no tip? People like that make you want to quit, but I love waxing and helping people feel good about themselves, especially for special occasions like weddings. So when you get a guest like that, it's just incredibly disrespectful. Story 25. I'm an so keeping things tidy down there is important for me. Tired of shaving, I decided to try waxing. I went to a cheap pedicure/manicure place in the mall, which was a huge mistake. First red flag, there was a garbage bag under the wax table, full of gloves. They were spilling out of the bag, and it looked like they had gathered gloves from various places, doctor's offices, dentist offices, just shoving them in this bag. It was a mess. A girl who barely spoke English came in. Normally, that wouldn't be an issue, but when you're about to have a conversation about waxing your private areas, it's not ideal. She was using strip wax, which some people can do well, but most professionals use rose or hard wax for sensitive areas. The wax was boiling hot and burned me, and to cool it down, she blew on it with her mouth. As a hairdresser who's had a lot of waxing done before, I know you're not supposed to blow your germs all over the wax. Also, I can take a lot of physical pain, but this was different. She wasn't putting pressure on the area after pulling off the wax strips, which you're supposed to do to help calm the pain. My skin was bleeding, and she was wearing rubber gloves, which had wax, cotton, and hair stuck to them, making them stick to my skin. Every time she peeled off her gloves, it pulled off fresh scabs, causing new blood to appear. She got to the point where she couldn't wax anymore, but there was still a lot of hair left. She grabbed a pair of dull tweezers and started pulling the remaining hairs out by hand. It felt awful, and by this point, I couldn't take it anymore and started crying. The poor girl was obviously new, probably not licensed, and was likely being forced to do this for a low wage. Afterward, my skin was raw, red, and bleeding. There were still hairs poking out, like a badly plucked chicken. I tipped the girl secretly because I felt for her, but I wasn't going to pay the salon for this service. When I tried to leave, the manager argued with me in thickly accented English, but when I asked to see the esthetician's license and told her I was on my way to the hospital, she went silent. I showed her my raw, bleeding pubic area, and she immediately backed off. I couldn't walk straight for a week and had to take a few days off work. When my boyfriend saw it, he almost cried. Luckily it healed, but there are a few spots where the hair won't grow back. I'm not sure if it's from waxing in general or that terrible experience in particular. After that, my boyfriend suggested I go to Frilly Lily, a high-end waxing place. My first appointment there was amazing, pain-free and pleasant. Now, I won't go anywhere else. The best part? They use nitrile gloves that don't stick to your freshly waxed skin. Oh, and when I worked in the hair salon where I was forced to wax clients, I once tore a huge flap of skin off my model's upper lip. It was deep, bloody, and happened so easily. I felt terrible about it, but after that, I never had to wax another client. Story 26. 2 years ago, while in aesthetic school, we were shown a full Brazilian wax demo on a volunteer model. We had the lead esthetician from the most upscale spa/wax bar in our town perform the service. The model was trimmed, powdered, and spread out for all 30 of us to see, and the professional esthetician, with 20 years of experience and referred to by our teachers as the Brazilian Queen, began applying wax. As she reached the edge of the labia, the client flinched, causing her outer left labia to unexpectedly stick to the inner left labia. The esthetician calmly explained that this can happen and advised us to be careful when removing the wax. But when she removed it, she pulled away more than just the wax. She tore off the thin, fleshy webbing between the inner and outer labia. Half of the woman's vagina was in the esthetician's hand, and blood started gushing everywhere. The entire class was in shock. Girls were screaming and trampling over each other to escape the scene. Our teachers were speechless, but the client was not. She remained calm throughout the ordeal, which only made the situation even more surreal. As for my first ever Brazilian client, she was pregnant. She had been advised it might not be the best idea, but she insisted. That appointment was unforgettable. Story 27. I had a client come in for a Brazilian wax, which is much more than just a bikini wax. She was older, a bit heavier, and hadn't really taken care of her area, so I knew it was going to be an interesting experience. First, I had to trim as much as I could with small scissors since attempting to wax hair that long would have been a disaster. The trimming took a lot longer than expected. Being in that small room with a hot wax pot and 2 people made it really stuffy. As soon as we started, the smell hit me hard, like a ton of bricks. Usually, after enough experience, you can manage most smells, but this one was definitely one of the worst. It was clear that she hadn't taken great care of the area, so there were some things to work around too. Story 28. One time, a client accidentally hit me in the stomach with her knee when she reflexively pulled up her leg after I removed a large patch of hair. She definitely seemed more embarrassed about it than I was. As for the usual stuff, period blood, dingleberries, unpleasant smells, all of that, it came with the job. What I found interesting, though, was that out of all the men I waxed, none of them were anything but clean. But some women, well, let's just say they didn't always take the best care. There was also this one 15-year-old boy whose parents, both of whom were regular clients, brought him in for a wax. They said it was for hygienic reasons. Not sure what that meant, but it was a bit odd. The most awkward experience, though, was with a male client who sometimes came in for a Brazilian wax. His wife insisted on being in the room with us, checking to make sure I was doing everything right, and even commenting if she thought I was getting too close or being inappropriate. Honestly, I was 24 and he was a 50-something-year-old man. Why would I even think about anything inappropriate? It was a little uncomfortable, to say the least. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.